Hey guys, it's Mr. O'Neill. I wanted to take a minute to kind of explain these notes and go over them in case you missed class, had internet issues, or just wanted to go over them again with a little bit of teacher explanation. As always, I've kind of set out a couple learning goals for us to answer while we're taking notes. And I'm going to kind of jump ahead to our next slide, where again, kind of how is Mr. O'Neill, how are we going to how is Mr. O'Neill going to test us? How is he going to assess us and know if we really get this information? Well, I'm going to pull it from these slides. I'm going to pull it from your notes. So I'd like you to make a copy of Cornell notes. Um, again, in the theme of staying organized, of taking, a few seconds to kind of make sure everything's in its right place. Put your name, your class period can just be block, put today's date and then the topic. And up here, put your name and your copy of your notes. So when you go back to study it, it's organized. You can find it in your Google Drive. Eventually, we'll put all these things into a folder so you have it in the one place. You can do that now if you know how. Otherwise, I'll walk you through that on another day. Or if you're keeping a notebook, just keep it in order and make sure you're reviewing this stuff, going over it, and you have it in a place to look at it. So the first thing we kind of defined was, what is history and how do we know? And we're looking at this clock and it's going all the way back in time. And how do we know? Well, archaeologists use artifacts to tell us about events from the past. Now we need to define these words. History is simply, well, I don't want to say simply, but it's the study of events from the past. An archaeologist is a person who studies that, and they actually use artifacts. That's a human-made object. I do want to take a minute to kind of discuss the difference between artifact and fossil. A fossil is the remains or an impression of a prehistoric organism, preserved in petrified form as mold or cast in rock. An artifact is a human-made object or tool. And a lot of the times people ask me, well, like, what if someone takes a human bone that was like a fossil and then they sharpen it? Well, if a person turned it into a tool, that then turned it into an artifact, right? So the thing is, fossils are kind of made by nature, and then artifacts are made by humans. And what archaeologists do, and they're able to do this with a great degree of science. I don't want to oversimplify it or, minimize it, but they use a lot of technology, carbon dating, and they spend a lot of time excavating at digs. And we'll get into what that means in a while. But what we need to know for history, we talk about this later on, but we need to know that history is the past, and archaeologists study it, and they use artifacts. So this is going to be the most confusing thing we kind of talk about today. And some of us have seen it, some of us might not have, but the best way to keep track of history is by using a timeline. And what we do is timelines have a couple of parts that we have to learn how to use, but timelines are kind of like number lines. They're a line. They're not always perfectly in the middle, right? And we'll explain that in a minute, but somewhere we're going to have year one or year zero. And to the right of that is CE, Common Era. And when we go back to BCE, before Common Era, that can go all the way back if you believe in theory that like the world is 6 billion, 7 billion years old, right? So we can go all the way back in time there, but we can only go up to the present day. So CE, Common Era, only goes up to now. And that's kind of like the simple way of looking at it. Now, you're going to see this explained a couple different ways. When I was growing up, a long time ago, they called it BC, before Christ. And then AD, Anno Domini, meaning the first year, it's Latin. But today, we like to use BCE and CE. So I just kind of got to pause and explain this for a second. So let's pretend we are all on a Zoom chat and we decide to join another IB school in China. Or we decide to Zoom with some students in India. Or we decide to Zoom with some students in the South Pacific. Are they all going to share our same religion? Are they all going to share every aspect of our culture? No, and that's okay. That's something we kind of have to get over. Not everybody's going to say Christ. Not everybody's going to know what that means. So we, have to understand that we're going to use a common language. And as historians, as historical thinkers, we kind of have to start to use that. In your brain, if you want to use this or say that, it's fine to me. But when we use it in a class, I'm going to ask that we use before Common Era and Common Era. And a little interesting fact, we'll kind of like look at these a little bit, but scientists believe the Earth is around 4.5 billion or up to 6 billion years old, but we've only been keeping track of time for only, I got to change that, 2020 years. I want to start over. What up, Sea Dogs? Hope y'all are doing good. I want to take a minute to go over our history notes. I want to kind of take a minute to answer any questions or clear anything up if you wanted some teacher instruction, if you had internet issues or, you missed class or if I was going too fast. So like with every set of notes, I'm going to give us some learning goals. And these are the questions that we want to try to answer while taking our Cornell notes. Mr. O'Neill always hopes that you do this by hand. If Cornell notes are not your thing and you don't like it, I ask that you try it. But if you already have a system that works for you, notice I said system, not just like, something random, chaotic disorder. We want to really stay with the theme of like giving things names, dating everything, giving it a question. These are our history notes. We want to change the name of our copy. So we want to say Andy's copy of History Cornell Notes. And this is where I'm going to have questions that I might want to ask Mr. O'Neill or look up later. I'm going to try to answer all those questions on the first slide here, so I just don't write everything down. And then I'm going to summarize. This does remind me of a funny story. And this is a story where when Miss O'Neill and I were first having our first child, she gave me this it was like a short book. And she's like, I want you to read this, and it's going to help us with the baby. And I said, Miss O'Neill, just highlight what's important, give it back to me, and I'll read the highlighted parts. Well, she gave it back to me and she highlighted every word, and like that's more of a lesson in like, love and passive aggression, whereas I want us to learn how to take notes to record from. So like the thing is, it's like when we highlight everything, we don't highlight everything. Like we would just reread it. So you want to start to extrapolate. You want to start to pull away. You want to start to reduce the notes into things that you can understand. And to make it easier, I've given you a list here. So let's jump into it. What is history and how do we know? Well, let's look at this statement here. Archaeologists use artifacts to tell us about events from the past. Let's define some of these words. So look, history is the study of events from the past. An archaeologist is a person who studies human history using artifacts, and an artifact is a human-made object. Pause 1 second. Archaeologists use artifacts to tell us about events from the past. That's a really complex sentence, and I want to kind of think that like archaeologists aren't in there with like shovels digging it up. There's a lot of science. There's an entire body of study that has gone into it, and people work really hard. And like there's things called carbon dating. There's all sorts of tools that archaeologists use to find and unpack things. And like I will tell very specific stories. And like we learn things every day. They just found something about the lost colony of Roanoke here in North Carolina that changes our understanding of that. So like this stuff still happens every day. But one thing we kind of got to learn the difference between fossils tell us a lot, and I'm sure you've learned about that in your other social studies classes, but artifacts can tell us about humans, right? Fossils tell us about history and all these things as well, but like the fossils is the remains or impressions of a prehistoric organism, and we'll talk about what prehistory is in another date, but artifacts are things that were made by humans. So if like a human took like a bone of an animal and manipulated it, and then that turned into a fossil, that would still be an artifact because like a human changed it, right? So like I'll answer questions, and when we get into the Stone Age, we look at artifacts a lot, and we go into some of the first tools that humans used before we had civilizations. So one of the trickiest things from today is going to be is to kind of how to understand how we keep track of history, right? And one of the easiest way historians do this is we use number lines. Now look, don't get scared. Like on the next slide, there's 2 videos you're going to watch, and they kind of explain it way more eloquently than I do. But one thing I do want to explain is you're going to see a couple different terms. But if you look, some scientists believe that the Earth is around 4.5 or 6 billion years old, and we'll kind of explain how that works and how they arrived at that conclusion. But that's BCE, before Common Era. And then the older term used to be before Christ. And then we started keeping track of time at 0 or year 1. People started writing things down. People started keeping track. We believe it was Mesopotamians. We will probably discover later on that it was a civilization before them, but right now, and the Mesopotamians are cool. It's like one of the first civilizations we study. I'm not trying to like be rude about them or anything. I'm just saying history is always changing. But one thing you see is like when I was growing up in middle school, we used BC and AD, which meant before Christ, and Anno Domini, which is Latin for the first year. But one thing is like, you know, Christianity is one of the largest religions in the United States. It's not the only, but it is one of the largest five in the world. But it's not the only religion. And so let's pretend we're Zooming with a class from China, or we're Zooming with a class from India, or we're Zooming with a class from somewhere in the Middle East. The expectation is, or the reality is, they're probably not going to have a lot of the same aspects of culture as us. And one of those aspects might be religion. So when we say Christ, they might not know what that means, but I bet you they do. But like the more appropriate, the more modern, the more scientific word to use is BCE and CE. In reality, I don't mind if you use both or which one you use, but I do want us to sound intelligent when we're having conversations with others, especially when you represent Piedmont. So using the most current, up-to-date, and eloquent language is something that I ask y'all to do. So let's kind of talk about timelines for another second. Scientists believe the Earth is about 4.5 billion years old. We've only been keeping track of a little over 2,000 years. So, like, think about it. Someone started, like, this is the start of time, right? And then this is all of BCE, and just a little bit is common era. So, like, another way to think about it, like, if all of that 4.5 billion years were reduced into one 24-hour period, humans would only be around for 77 seconds. The Earth is super old and human history is part of it, but there's a whole lot of pre-human history that exists that we'll kind of talk about, and it's super interesting. But we all need to know how it works and how timelines work. So this is how it's going to go. This is good. These two videos are going to help you understand timelines and get some visual representations. When you're done, you can listen to the very best song ever put down, recorded to music as a little break. And then lastly, make sure you have answered these questions in your notes. I do put down here, all of these answers should be answered. Ooh, I got to change that. In your Cornell notes using this slideshow, not your Google machine. I know we all have an impulse to want to just type this into Google or just try to search these answers, but the Social Studies Department at Piedmont has worked very hard to do that already for you and kind of apply the degrees we have in history as well to help you understand this. So when I write the test, when we write the assessment, when we write projects, we're going to be basing your understanding off of these notes. So please, if you want to go further, if you want to take it to the next level, go. I'm here to talk to you. I'm here to discuss it. I'm here to further your searches. But we want to kind of start here with our baseline. And I appreciate y'all. I know this was a long one, so I'm going to end it. And good luck.